Thanks a lot, Bryan, for making the time for this interview. I will quickly introduce you, and I would love for you to add some more to it. And so, you're an associate professor in, I would call it customer success, but the official title is associate professor of marketing at the University of Alabama. I also read that you're the director of the Museum of Customer Success.
That's a
Uh,
self-appointed role.
um, but here today we are talking about your publication in Harvard Business Review, which is titled Towards Healthier B2B Relationships. My
Correct.
first, yeah, so thank you so much for making this time. But my first question would be, why did you pick this title?
Well, that's a good question. Part of it is the Harvard Business Review process of publishing. I think we arrived at this as being our title, but the idea of this paper is to find a way to monitor and to grow relationships in a much more systematic kind of strategic way. Not only monitoring them to make those relationships better or maintain them in better ways, but also using that data to develop longer term, even new relationships by kind of sort of informing the model that you have to go out and seek new customers or how you manage customers in the future based on what's worked with customers you have now. So I think it fits pretty well. It's the idea of moving your company using this new system of customer health scoring towards healthier business relationships. So that's the title.
Cool. And like, how would you define customer health?
Yeah, we probably have an exact definition in here, but the idea of customer health is 3 dimensions and included in it. But the idea of customer health scoring is to have a way to monitor if dynamic relationships are moving towards more positive or towards more negative states, or if they're just being maintained, having kind of an early warning system to let you know how things are going with your customers without really having to ask them, and using more inputs in that than we've used in the past. So that's not a clear definition. I don't remember exactly what our
No,
clear
no,
definition was, but that's what it's all about.
but it's definitely getting more and more important to score customer health, to track it, to be on top of it.
Well, this came from industry, right? So I also have a paper in IJRM that looks at this too. And we've been studying this for a long time with a bunch of different companies. And it's not every company's using this, but those that have this focus on either customer experience or customer success or some kind of mix of it, um, they're finding that, it's not so simple. Like just having NPS scores is a relatively flawed metric that has a lot of missing data. It's only collected at certain times a year. It's only from so many different customers, and it's only from different, some customers within the customer organization. So, and your customers are a lot more complex than that these days, and you need a lot more relevant, quick, and kind of up to the minute type data in today's world to know what's going on. So if you get an NPS score every quarter, and you're making business decisions on that, that's probably not the best. Like that's part of customer health. There's nothing wrong with NPS, but it's not a complete picture. So a lot of
Mhm.
companies are wanting something that's a much more, responsive type instrument than satisfaction or NPS or something like that.
No, totally. And so you mentioned like 3 dimensions. So what are those 3 dimensions in customer
Yeah,
health
and
then?
this comes from the way this company did this, and also that there's a case study of this Harvard Business Review, but also from our research that we have in other places. Um, the customer relationship quality, product usage, and value realization. Nothing real new in those, I don't think, but it's how they're measured and what you're doing with that information. But the idea of some sort of objective and subjective and some forward looking and some looking backwards type things about how the customer relationship is going and how the company that buys your product is using your product. That's probably the
Hmm.
biggest thing in this. It's
Hmm.
not the highest weight so much, but the idea that we can use data, hard data, to see how customers are using our products in a lot of cases when they've been digitized is really important. And then value realization is, typically the in a B2B relationship, customer experience is very important, but the value they get from the product is going to be weighted more heavily than the experience. You need to have a mix. You can't have terrible experience and a lot of value. I did work with one company that had that, and that worked for them, but it was a very rare case. Um, so a lot of companies will weight the value realization as the biggest part of their health score, and then the idea of product use and customer relationship quality is the other two dimensions that play into it.
Right. So what I got from your article is that you have to put different weights to different dimensions, and under those dimensions, you have different variables, different elements that play a role to what we would call like a construct.
Yeah, yeah, and if you want more details on that, I know this is about the HBR, but this article comes directly out of an international journal of research and marketing
Mm,
also, and there's a little more detail on that. But the idea is, and it's different for every company. It would be nice if you just say, here's the program, right? But it's not. So that's why we give three dimensions. It's going to really be
mm,
based on what your company does, what your product is, what kind of data that's generated by your product, the things you can measure and count and see that can be relevant. So you're looking for things that fit in those three buckets, right? And then you also want to be thinking about, well, our customers are at different levels, right? So product usage might have something to do more with the end user, maybe some data on that. Value realization might be reflected from the decision makers you work with, maybe also the end users, maybe also executives, right? That are reporting stuff on that. So the company in the Harvard Business Review that we talk about has 10 metrics as a part of their health score,
oh,
10 sub metrics that fall into these three categories. Um, that's not a magic number. I mean, I don't think you want it to be too complex,
mm,
but it's going to change for every company. But if you're looking at things that have to do with this relationship quality, usage, and value realization, you're going to be on the right track. And then it just really comes down to, like, what do we have? It's a
mm,
discussion that companies kind of have to have, like, how, if you understand what these things are, what do we have that's measuring this that would be objective and might help and that could be updated regularly?
cool. So really go for multidimensional measurements, see like if you really capture the customer health
Yeah,
from each
how it comes
customer,
through.
or do you have
Oh, go
one
ahead.
approach for all customers or per segment, or how would you do it?
So that's a good question. This company has three different tiers of customers that they use this scoring system with, and they use the same scoring system across all three. I don't
Mm,
know if they will fine tune that as time goes on. I mean, it's sort of a data analytics thing, right? You're constantly
yeah.
trying to calibrate this and see if it's still working right, and it may
Mhm,
change as time goes on. But um, in general, if a company can identify key metrics, you can do this through qualitative, asking people that work for you, looking at what's worked, looking at data, seeing which things are most predictive of later churn. That's what this is all about. The idea is, like,
mhm,
we need to know now what's going to happen 9 months from now. If we're going to retain
mm,
a customer or not, we need to know in advance. We can't just know in the last minute, because it's too late then. We've already lost the customer. So if you can come up with, through analyzing your data, some metrics that are predictors of that 9 months from now kind of either good
mm,
or bad outcome, those would be good candidates to be in your customer health score. If your people that work with your customers can give you here's some things that have really been big flags of a bad relation, things going wrong in a relationship, you'd want to seek to try and figure out how you measure that in your company. Um, so I don't know. I think in the companies I've talked to, they're all pretty much using across the board kind of health score. I don't know. It may become more fine tuned with that over time
oh,
than that.
no, excellent, excellent approach. And I like the idea of being proactive instead of reactive, because reactive is trying to, yeah, trying to solve a problem, while you could like solving a problem while it might be
Yeah.
already too late.
That's kind of the beauty of the health score, though, is it should be proactive. Like, you should be able to get your customers, I mean, hopefully, to a point where they're kind of healthy, and then you
Mm,
work on maintaining them there, right? Or getting them a little bit more healthy or whatever. But you
mm,
also might get flags at times where there's a drop, right? And it's kind of
yeah.
like, they call it health. I mean, if you think about it, it just relates a lot to things we do in our own human body, right? So I don't want to get too
Mm,
far into
yeah.
that, but you check blood pressure and pulse and whatever weight and whatever as predictors of how things will be in the future, right? And I mean it's the same idea of this customer health. You're trying to find these indicators, these kind of critical indicators of how things are going, and sometimes an emergency happens and you have to be reactive, but it's better to know that now than
Mm,
not know it at all. And then so they can lead to, it's mainly a proactive system, but it
mm,
definitely flags points where some escalations or some reactive action might be needed for something that takes a bad turn for the worse. Competitor is getting really active with your client, and you're seeing some changes in their behavior, and all of a sudden your
mm.
health score is going down. It's better to know that now when you can do something about it. You're still being proactive, but you're reactively being proactive, I guess. You know when to be reactive and a little earlier than normal.
Yeah, and very good link to our own health. Like just knowing if you have too much or too high blood pressure, you can modify
There's a
the
lot
intake
of
of
there's I mean
salt
we
or
I
sugar.
I've
Yeah.
written all different things about this over the years, and some of it's made it to publication, some not. But if you think of like your smartwatch or whatever, and all the little metrics, I get a sleep score, I get all this different stuff, right? It's kind of
Mm,
like that. It's very, very similar to that. Like, what would be telling me if my health is going in the right direction or not?
mm,
Without me having to go to the doctor or whatever. I just have sort of a monitoring system. And if there's anything you track in your life, you can kind of analogize it to that. And it's what companies are doing, and they're trying to have sort of these same kind of like smartwatch kind of metrics
mm.
that would let them know if things are going well or not, and if they need to make a change or if they don't.
No, very good. And who should be responsible for this in a company?
Still kind of a good question. You know, the idea of customer success is in many companies now. We could talk for hours on that too, if they have it or
Hmm.
not, or what it looks like. And it's evolving over 10 plus years now of being used different places. But in most cases, that team would be the most likely to do this, but they'd be working to develop the system first. It would have to include elements of like what data do we have, so different people in operations and different areas that would bring data together. Um, it would involve inputs from sales and other people that kind of know what's happening with customers in addition to customer success. Once it's established and a system is working, it's largely maintained by customer success, but it should be accessed, and the information can be used across departments, and that's what this paper says. Um, things that come out of this customer health score can help with the managing relationships, but also help towards even more proactive behavior that maybe production can use, that maybe product development can use, that maybe the sales function can use to improve their prospecting, to find customers that are more likely to
Mm.
be healthy with the firm than just randomly going and picking ones, right? So um, it really sort of is a thing that when you ask who should be doing it, it tends to be customer success, but a lot of people should get involved in developing it and also using it in different ways once it's operational.
Right. Very cool. And what would you recommend to companies when they only use NPS today, or they only do, I don't know, just some QBRs and quarterly business reviews, or even once
Yeah,
a year? What would you do? What would be like the first steps they should take towards healthier
yeah, and
B2B
I've had these
relationships?
discussions, and at the most basic level, right, at just the most like, I don't really do consulting, but if I did, I mean, I'd always start with, well, let's talk about what are some of these predictors that just from years of experience, right? And then what are some other key things about your product that you can measure? Tell me about your customers. Is there multiple levels of your customer that you should be concerned with that are going to ultimately have something to do with if your product continues being used or not? And I mean, normally I just sit down with the company if we're just talking about this idea, and it's a couple-hour conversation with people from a few different functions that understand the data and the customers. And within not that long a period of time, you can come up with a short list. And we have examples in that IJRM paper if anybody wants to look. A short list, though, of things that if we could measure these, we would have a better picture than just NPS, right? And NPS would be one of them. So I'm not anti-NPS.
Hmm.
It's a lot of companies use it and they're happy with it, and yeah, that just
Hmm.
becomes one of a few, right? And it can be as few as 3 or 4 or 5 items. Customer health doesn't have to be super super complex. It can be more. Some, I think one company had like 23 that we talked to. That's
Hmm.
probably on the high end, but my advice would be get a few people that understand the data of the company and the customers of the company together and say,
Mm-hmm.
what if we had to come up with a list of, say, 10, like this company that we worked with did, what would be some things that we'd want to consider in there about product usage and about relationship quality and about value realization that we could automate measurement of for most of them to drive an ongoing just dashboard. It's basically a dashboard, right? And metrics and
Mm-hmm.
dashboards compiled into one. They call it customer health because that's what that metric is about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think my advice would be you don't have to start with really complex. And the paper actually goes, the Harvard Business Review talks about some different kind of stages of how this develops or can develop. And I would just start with that, like, and maybe you can even track it in a spreadsheet to begin with, right? It doesn't have to be super complex, but start seeing, do these things predictive? Maybe start with a small subset of your customers and come up with 8 or 10 metrics that you think would combine together would make sense, and see if they're doing what you think they'll do, if they're predicting retention or churn in a way that makes sense for your customer base and your situation. And if so, then you continue to expand it and fine tune it, right? That's what the companies do. So it doesn't have to be super complex. It doesn't have to be buy a lot of software and everything right up front. It's a way of thinking. It's like taking maybe what really well engaged sales forces of yesterday used to know about their customers, and and their gut and their instinct and everything, and finding ways to kind of measure that, because as we get bigger customer bases and we get more complex and all this stuff, we can't really keep track of that so easily, and we can't always just be out talking to our customers and asking them how it's going. We actually want to know, in a true sense these days, the seller can know more about how a product is being used and how effectively it's being used by the customer than the customer. So if I were to ask you as my customer, how's it going? You might say, well, I think it's going well, but I would actually be able to say, well, you know what, we actually have some data here that tells us some areas that need some improvement and some areas that are going really well, and let's keep working on them, right? That's the idea of customer success, but health
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the mechanism that tells you where those things are, at least so you can look at it quickly and know how things are going. So um, keep it simple first is my advice. Develop it as time goes on. If it's working
Mm-hmm.
well, continue to make it more and more fine-tuned and maybe a little bit more complex to really do well.
Excellent. That's very good advice. And yeah, there were all my questions about your very interesting article, and we want to thank you for your time, for your insights, and advise everybody to read the article and also the one in IGRM. I will copy the link below.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.